So first we're going to look at vision and mission statements. So it's a very primary place that we should start, and all of your organizations should have both vision and mission statements. And why do you need them? Really, it's just to make sure that you have focus within your organization. They not only tell you what you want to do, but they also help you focus on what you're not going to do. All of us, when we're working in nonprofit, whether it's volunteers, a paid position, are faced with opportunities all the time that sound fantastic, but they're outside of where we've decided to focus. And if we spread ourselves too thin, we're never going to get done what we need to get done, all right? So if you have the vision and the mission statements in place, they're going to help you focus. What they're also going to do is give people a really quick snapshot of what your organization is all about. So it's a quick way of communicating why are we here and what are we trying to do. It provides, both of them provide unifying forces, too, for your volunteers. So everybody's pretty clear on what we're all trying to accomplish and how we can achieve them together. So what's a vision statement and why do we need both of these things? So vision statement really is your big dream. What would you ideally like to happen if the world was perfect, right? It should just be a really quick one sentence, very short. It's just an ideal situation of where you would like to focus your time. I would caution you with your vision statement, please make sure that you are actually contributing to what your vision statement is. So I know a lot of us would just like to say, we would like our cancers cured, and I totally get it. But if you're not doing any research or something that actually contributes to the cure, then that should probably not be your vision statement. Instead, focus, if you're providing support, on how you're going to help patients through the journey. All right? I just think that that is a really important point. Otherwise, people will lose faith in you, and they will think that you're not quite, if they may just prefer that you start to think that you're not going to deliver on any of your promises, and that's just really not where you want to start. Make sure it's really broad. It should be hopeful. You don't want a vision statement that says the things you're not going to do. So really make it uplifting so that people can embrace it and get on board with your organization and what you're trying to accomplish. So what's the difference with a mission statement? A mission statement takes your vision statement and makes it slightly more tactical. It's still a broad statement, but it's the actions that you're going to take to achieve your mission, right, or achieve your vision. So it's really it's concise, it's still usually one sentence, it's very much outcome or tactical, and it's inclusive of your entire population that you're trying to serve. That's all great, but what do we do? How do we actually make these happen? So the first thing you really need to do is understand what's important to your community. And your opinion as an individual is not necessarily what your community thinks. So the only way to really figure out what your community thinks is to ask them. So go out and start asking people, what's really the most important thing to you as an MPN patient or a CLL patient? And what would you like us to do as an organization? What's the best way that we could support you? Now, you may come back, I'm sure you will come back with all kinds of different ideas. And it's your job then as your board, steering committee, whatever your leadership is, to whittle those down, narrow them down, and figure out what exactly is it that you think you can do. And that's what's going to go into your statements. You also, at the end, need to find consensus. So once you've gone through this whole process, the brainstorming, whatever it might be, to get down to actually having these vision and mission statements, go back to your community and make sure that it makes sense to them as well, right? If you want people to be engaged and keep supporting you, then you have to make sure that everyone is on board and in line with what you've decided. And then, of course, lastly, you have to decide what you're going to do with this vision and mission statement. They're no good if it's just something that you've decided as your little group and you don't let anybody else know. So really, make sure you're publicizing them frequently on your website, on any printed materials, T-shirts, whatever it is that you're doing. Thank you cards are great. If you're sending them out and you can print them off on a computer at home, and still have your mission or vision statement printed on the front. So really quick. So I am involved right now with 3 different organizations. Now, I know these are all CLL related because that's where I focus right now, but it's not exclusive of the MPN community by any means. It's just a way to give examples of different size organizations and how we handle this. So I actually work for Lymphoma Canada. Now, Lymphoma Canada obviously has a broader focus. So CLL is just part of what we do, but we do engage the whole lymphoma community. And we do have a vision statement, which is simply life unlimited by lymphoma. Research is not really a big focus for Lymphoma Canada. What is a focus is helping patients currently dealing with lymphoma maximize their experience, and which sounds a little weird, but you know what I mean, so that they're as healthy and as well as they possibly can be through their cancer. Do they know enough information about their cancer? Do they have the support mechanisms they need that they can get through this? That's where we focus. That's why then we get into our mission statement, which is empowering patients and the lymphoma community through education, support, and research. Now, I know I just told you we don't do a lot of research, but we still have research in the mission statement. We do. We support research, but it's such a minor amount of our actual dollars at this point in time that it isn't translated into the vision statement. Because the vision statement, really, where most of our dollars go, is still into education and support. All right? Now, the CLL Patient Advocacy Group is a patient-driven, for the most part, organization. The board members are almost all patients. We have some exceptions, me being one. But their focus is to advocate and provide education to improve access to healthcare that will extend the lives of Canadians affected by chronic lymphocytic leukemia and small lymphocytic lymphoma. Pretty self-explanatory, right? So that's exactly the two areas that we focus in from CLL PEG is through, we do a lot of health technology assessment and other advocacy work, and the education that that organization is focused on is actually large-scale conferences that they host every 2 to 3 years with about 300 people in attendance at each one. So that's where their role is. And then we come down to the CLL Advocates Network. And really, what we're looking at doing is to enhance CLL patient care and improve outcomes. And as a global perspective, below this we would have a number of other statements explaining how we're going to do it, but that's the core of what we're going to do. So like I said, once you've had all this information, you know what your community thinks, you still have a role as within your organization to figure out what this is going to look like as you move forward. So you're going to have some brainstorming sessions, talk about it. Not everybody's creative, not everybody's going to think of the best words that go in your mission or vision statement. That's okay. Usually somebody is, and usually you'll all know what sounds really good because you'll have a bunch of people when somebody says something go, oh yeah, that sounds great, right? And that's what really helps. You can hire companies to help you with this, but it can be expensive. So still, you can try it by yourselves. If you don't think you have the creativity, look and see who else around you might be able to help and if they can give you some support. Again, be creative in how you get the messages across just to make sure that you start to develop your brand, which is something we'll talk about later. But it is important to start getting it out there so that people recognize who you are, start having faith in you as an organization, and understand how it is that you can help them. And now we get into some governance. So governance actually is a way of describing how everybody is going to work together within an organization. Now, it doesn't matter if you have staff or not, it's really everybody else, whether it's volunteers, if you have a board, you have a steering committee, you have actual committees within your organization, we're giving them some framework of how we're going to work together. And the success of your governance and your organization is defined by the organization's mission. So you need that mission first. It's really hard to bring a group of people together and say, we're going to achieve, we're not sure what, but it's going to be great, right? So get that mission kind of ironed out so that when you're all together, you know, okay, this is always our focus, and it helps really direct you and make sure if you do have disagreements or different projects everybody wants to pursue, it gives you some unity back. So why is this important? Well, lots of reasons. Let's be honest, stakeholders, you know, our customer base, the people that give us dollars, the patients we serve, the doctors we work with, everybody's looking for more transparency from charities. There is no question. They want to know how we're spending the money, where the money is coming from, what we may think of doing with the money. Do we cover how much of our staff are paid? Do we pay for alcohol? People have lots of questions of what we're doing with their donor dollars because they want to make sure that we're maximizing them so that the patients get the best support possible. Governance helps with this. And we're going to go into some of the basic things that you would need in your governance structure to help address these issues. So I know Jon went into this actually a little bit, but there are different types of organizations in terms of how you can structure yourselves. One is you can be really formal, which means that you're a registered nonprofit in your country. The second is you can be informal, which is that you're basically not registered, but it doesn't mean that you don't have any official structure behind you. And the last one is actually that you're involved in a partnership, which is the example, for instance, that MPN Voice uses, where they've joined with another organization to help. Regardless of how you're structured, you do need some kind of constitution or organizational structure written down, or bylaws, which are usually required anyways if you are a registered charity. So again, I'm going back to my 3 organizations because they're all very different in how they function. So if we look at Lymphoma Canada, we are a registered charity in Canada. We have a very formal structure. Our board of directors is all volunteer driven, but they are all also a governance or a policy board. So what they do is provide oversight. They help with strategic planning, definitely give direction, but then the staff implement. Right? So their focus isn't, they don't necessarily do the work. Within that board, though, they have very specific skill sets that they're looking for, and they work with a scientific advisory board, a nursing advisory board, and a patient and family advisory committee to make sure that they're getting a lot of input from all the different communities that are working within the lymphoma space in Canada. If you look at CLL PEG, it's an informal structure. It is not a registered charity in Canada. And that's a deliberate choice so far from the CLL PEG perspective. Because once you register, there are more expectations for you that you have to comply with from a government perspective, right? So filing of audited statements. There are certain forms that you have to fill out within Canada to keep your charitable status, for instance. So there's a lot of extra work that have costs associated with them, and we're not prepared to do that at this time. We do, though, have a very defined structure. So our board has roles and responsibilities. We have a very clear code of conduct that we all sign and agree to, and a way of, certain number of meetings that we have each year with required board attendance. So we have all the parameters in place for a constitution, even though we don't have official charitable status. What we also do then is when we're holding big events, and if we run into a corporation of some kind, whether it's industry or not, that won't sponsor us because we don't have charitable status, we will work with larger organizations that are established so that we can still receive the funding. So there are ways of working around this. I will tell you, though, for a lot of the pharma and other corporate sponsors that we work with, because we have a clearly defined structure, even though we are not a registered nonprofit, they still give us the money directly. So what's important here is researching what's credible within your own country. So go back and figure it out and have those discussions with the people that might fund you to see if it's going to be an issue or not. Right. And then we have the Advocates Network. And what we're doing is basically what I would call a partnership. So we work with LePAF. LePAF has the formal structure, and then we're a subcommittee of that group. But we do have a memorandum of understanding with LePAF. So, which is great. They've been very good to us. Obviously, same goes for the MPN group. It's just that everything that they told us they could do, we then took and put into a written document and had everybody sign off on it. And it's not a lack of trust, and there's the only reason that we do that is to protect everybody involved, and so also we can show people that we work with, this is how we function in an official way. All right, we need that kind of transparency. We still, though, even within that, have our own defined organizational structure. So we know what a chair does, what the vice chair does, et cetera, and we have our own strategic plan. Now I see some looks in the audience because we are working on finalizing those documents for sure. This is the first time actually that we've actually started having officers in place, and so we're really looking forward to how this might develop. I was actually elected a vice chair by email because we needed somebody at the time, and I was like, yeah, okay, I can help. We'll get more formal with that process. So you need some policies and procedures. You don't have to call them policies and procedures, but you do need some of these in place. So what therefore is to really encourage and ensure that people work well together. All right, and that you're building up your patient trust, your other customers, which may include your donors, so that they can have faith in you and what you say you're going to do. So at a minimum, you should have the following 4 things. You should have privacy or confidentiality agreements that all of your key people are signing off on, because patients tell us really sensitive data. They should be ensured that that data is not going to be accidentally transferred to somebody that shouldn't see it, right? It's private information, and it's just another way of ensuring that it stays private. What also is private is some of your discussions that happen at your board or your steering committee, whatever your leadership group is. That information can be very private and sensitive, and you need to make sure that people aren't communicating that outside of the room that you're in. A code of ethics or a code of conduct is necessary, again, just so everybody plays nice. And I know we're not in grade school anymore and you think everybody will know this, but what I will also tell you is that when people come into charities, they're often very, very passionate about the cause. Either they've been diagnosed themselves, or their spouse or somebody close to them has been through the illness, and they have a vision of what this is going to look like. Unfortunately, we're all individuals, so your vision may not match the person next to you. And it's just, it's not discouraging the passion by any means. What it is just saying, this is how we're going to work together to make sure that we have healthy discussions about issues that we don't agree on, and we'll come to some kind of consensus at the end of the day. The conflict of interest or competition statement is really just to make sure, again, that your key leaders are really focused on doing what is best for the organization and not what may be best for themselves personally. We do run into issues where you need to hire, for instance, a printing company, and one of your board members owns a printing company. Well, that's a conflict of interest. Now, they may give you a really good deal, but just to be on the safe side, you should go out and get extra quotes to make sure that you can prove to people this is a great deal and we save the organization money. But the conflict of interest will also have that person that owns the printing company say, I have a great deal for you, but I have to tell you right up front, it's my business and I will make a profit, right? And then last is a transparency statement. So in most cases, what our constituents are looking for in a transparency statement really is, how are you working with pharma? They want to know if you have pharma dollars that you're not going to support a specific drug over another one because of that money. And I know it's not something that we necessarily think of, because of course we just want what's best for our patients at the end of the day. But having those kinds of documents in place is going to make a big difference in how you're perceived. So your board, whatever you want to call your leadership group, right? There are certain things that you need to be prepared for, and you need to be able to answer these questions. So what is the fundamental work of the board? There are all kinds of different boards out there. For most of us, we're working boards, as in it's great to participate, but we're not going to come together and just, discuss some ideas and then all go home and say, that was so much fun. We're actually going to have to figure out how to implement those ideas too. All right. So figure out what your board is going to do and who's going to do the work and what that might look like. How is the board going to add value? That's a case of looking at your community and figuring out, well, this is what we think we want to do because we have this mission statement and we have this vision. But does the community really need us? So make sure that what you're doing is not replicating what other people are doing. If it is a replication, it's because your service is a much better quality. Figure it out exactly so you can communicate it back to people, how you add value, and who you need on your board to make that happen. And what are you going to do with this governance framework that you created? You have to evaluate it. I would recommend on a yearly basis. Go back and look at your mission and vision. Is it still applying? Oftentimes, you may need to tinker with it if there have been changes within the disease area, for instance. You can change because now you've been able to hire some staff, you have more money, so let's change what the board does because now we have staff who can handle some things. Always go back and reevaluate those documents to make sure they're valid and current for your situation. So basically, your board members, your key responsibilities, diligence, right? Loyalty, obedience. This is not rocket science by any means, but it needs to be your focus, right? All the time, when you're working with that board, you have to be doing what's best for the organization that that board represents. So board development, because we get this question a lot. It's like, we need more people. Where do we find more people? So we have this board, and they're committed to independence, continuous improvement, and strong relationships. So who do we need on them? We need people with good skill sets, diversity of experience. We want to regularly evaluate the board, and we want to have a collaborative relationship with management if you do have staff. What you need to do then is, like in some basic roles and responsibilities, lay out how the board will function, who's going to do what kind of skills you're looking for, and who might have them. So if you look, for instance, I'll give you an example with Lymphoma Canada. I don't remember if I had a slide on this. I think I do in a minute. But with Lymphoma Canada, we have a skills analysis. So every time a terms of reference ends, we can go back and look at where is the gap. If this person leaves, this is what we counted on them for. So we need to find somebody with this new skill set to help support us as a team. They're very easy to do. If you want samples of any of these things, I have lots of samples that I can share at another time. But I have this little CLL patient demographic in here for a very good reason. Representing your patient base on your board or steering committee is a fabulous idea. You should represent your community. With CLL, be very realistic about what that might look like, because the average age of a person diagnosed with CLL is 72. They're slightly more prevalent in the male population. CLL causes fatigue, high rate of infections. There's no cure, so patients are currently going through a rotation of a watch and wait phase, going into treatment, going back into watch and wait, et cetera, et cetera. This person that I'm describing to you right here is a really bad volunteer, right? They're not your ideal candidate. For one, women are usually more likely to volunteer than male. It's just the way it is. Most of your volunteers who are working on a board level are going to be younger than 72. Retired people may be interested, but not so much if they're ill, right? Extreme fatigue is not helpful if you are asking people to come out to meetings and help lead projects. I am not excluding this population at all. I'm just telling you, if you're going out, for instance, to the CLL community, there's a good chance you're going to get the younger demographic of the people affected by CLL, or a caregiver as opposed to a typical CLL patient. So I know in the CLL world, we talk about how clinical trials usually recruit people that are younger than the person you see on the street. Well, your volunteers are probably going to be more closer to the people in the clinical trials in some ways, right? You're probably going to have more people of that younger demographic. So, there's nothing like Yoda to give you some kind words of advice all the time. So if we look really closely at the different groups again. So where Lymphoma Canada has a governance board, like I said, where we focus then is there are very specific skill sets in each of those areas. We're looking for people with financial background, an accountant, a lawyer, those specific skills, because we have certain governance responsibilities because we're a registered nonprofit. We have a requirement for lymphoma patients. We have a requirement that there be at least one doctor on the board. Then other than that, we're looking at other skill sets. Fundraising, for one, business strategic development experience. There are certain key things that we've defined that are important for our organization to complete a strategic plan and to grow. That is what we're looking for. If we look at the CLL PEG, we are a working board. There is nobody else. We're doing the work. So when we get together, we know that we're going to look at our strategic plan and then figure out how we as a group are then going to deliver on it. The board for CLL PEG, there are 10 people on the board, I believe. Peter can correct me if I'm wrong. He's correcting me. I'm not off by much. It's good. So what we do with that board, for the most part, it is patients. Now, when I talked about the typical CLL patient may not be a good volunteer, our board, even though it's mainly patients, skews far lower than the 72 age bracket. All right. Even though most of the people are no longer working because of their disease, they are still younger than 72 by far. At the same point in time, we do have on that group a medical advisor, a scientific advisor, and then they have me. I'm not sure what my role is, but I'm there. And they're a great group to work with. Now, with the CLL patient advocacy group, what's important is they have representation across the country, so that's a key demographic for them, is they're always looking to who are we missing to represent the patient population right across Canada. Canada, even though it's one country with a single healthcare system, has different delivery models in each province, so access is very, very different depending on where you live. So that's partly why it's important to get that cross-country representation. And then we look at the Advocates Network, where we have a steering committee. The steering committee is based, I know we introduced them earlier for those of you in the CLL group, but the steering committee is made up of people from different countries. There are purposely people on the committee that are in organizations that are solely focused on CLL. And then there's the rest of us that have a partial focus on CLL, but still have a commitment to improving the network. So it is a global in terms of we have people from 8 different countries, I think. I'll have to go back and check. But we all come with different levels of experience and different types of organizations to try and serve as broad a population as possible. Now, this was the last thing that Nick threw at me at the end of this broad topic that he gave me, was something to do with directors' liability insurance, which I really look at as risk management. So I'm only going to talk about this really briefly because this could be a whole topic by itself. Sophia's sticking out her tongue. I agree, it's not a fun topic, but it is a big topic. So basically, this is your obligation to ensure that you have all the kinds of systems you need in place to protect and minimize the risk that your organization might experience. Now, one of these answers to this might be that you have directors' liability insurance, and that's to protect the individual directors that are on your board from lawsuits, basically, that could otherwise affect their personal income and their personal finances. But it is much, much more than that. Much more than that. So there are all kinds of ways whenever you're looking at a decision or for your organization or a new program that you're going to introduce about what should I be most concerned about, what should we be most concerned about, what is the potential risk to our organization. And one of the points brought up earlier in your buddy system was very much that there is a risk involved with patients giving patient support, right? Because we have certain lines we cannot cross. Unless you actually have medical professionals on staff, you should not be giving medical information. So how do you control that? How do you make sure that your volunteers understand that kind of information? And for instance, one of the things we do is obviously provide training with our peer program, but also have them sign off on a document that says clearly, you will not give medical advice. And it's just different things like this you should have in place to protect your organization organization as you move forward and as you grow, and you need to regularly review this. At Lymphoma Canada, every new program, every decision we make, a risk management assessment is part of that, where we have to look at what could potentially happen if we implement this. Now, sometimes the answer is nothing. It's all good. It's really easy, which is great. But other times there are other things we have to consider before we implement. And I'm going to stop because I see a big red thing that says my time is up.
Thank you so much, Lorna. I mean, everybody's waiting for the juicy stories, but I think you're going to save them for dinner.
Yeah,
I have one question where you said you were talking about governance and you were strongly focusing on the external view of it, like transparency, accountability, and ethics. What I've seen over the years, there have been a lot of board fights, of board members fighting against each other, and so on. So how do you see, let's say in terms of governance, the importance of internal rules to make very clear what's the role of the treasurer, what's the role of the president, what's the role of the secretary, and how does that all function? How do you see that?
I agree. So when I talked about a constitution or bylaws, usually within that are some very clear roles for your key leaders within your group. So it defines what your president can do, what your vice president can do, whatever you want to call them, chair, vice chair, your secretary, and your treasurer. What kind of power do they actually have? Can they veto everybody else? Can they not? Those things you need to have really, really clearly laid out. You should also have on top of that some roles and responsibilities for your board. So everybody understands the basic criteria expected of everybody that participates. And in regards to the fact that people can fight, definitely that goes back to having that code of conduct of what you expect of anybody within your organization on how they're going to relate to each other. I know, like I said, that people get really, really passionate when they're in a charity. And there are people that often come into a charity and think, oh my gosh, I'm joining a charity. Everybody's going to be happy all the time because we're fighting for good. And really, we all know that's not the reality because people are very passionate. So you are going to run into conflicts, and that's okay. Conflicts are fine. Conflicts are healthy. It makes everybody think outside the box and think of something different. What's not okay is personal attacks and how you approach that conflict. So that's what your code of conduct explains and helps people focus.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that one of the tricks to doing a lot of this is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Lots of other not-for-profits will be extremely helpful. And almost everything you've talked about, somebody else in your country has already done and would be happy to loan you their framework so you don't have to hire lawyers or, do all this stuff, and then you just adapt it to yourself. That's what we did when we set up our not-for-profit, is just take, we asked people, can we look at your bylaws? Can we look at this? And people were extremely helpful in that regards, and it really saves you a lot of time, and then you just adapt it to your own personal circumstances.
Thank you, Brian.